All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday Times Roundtable, where each week we engage in conversation around current global issues, trends, problems, and opportunities that are of interest to you. Our weekly Tuesday Times Roundtable is made possible
Recording in
through a
progress.
formal partnership with the New York Times. This partnership also brings a New York Times guest speaker to FIU annually and provides you, FIU students, faculty, and staff with free access to the digital form of the New York Times newspaper. I'm Sherry Beeson, your host and Senior Program Coordinator for the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. With me, you probably already met her in the back, is Anna Prado, and monitoring our Zoom live is Michelle Zaldivar, also of the Office of Global Learning. Together, we've been working hard to bring you today's panelists. And whether you're joining us here face-to-face or live via Zoom, we're glad you're here. By the way, how many are with us via Zoom today?
Right now, we are at 19 participants.
19 people, and we know others may be joining us any minute. So glad all of you are here. Later today during our session, we will be taking your questions. So if you're joining us virtually, please put those in the chat. Michelle's going to share them with us. Otherwise, I'll be walking around with the mic to get your questions. We want them answered, right? That's why we're here. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest moderator, who will then introduce all of our panelists to you. To my left is Caridad Mas-Batchelor. And she is Special Projects Administrator 1 for the Miami-Dade Police Department. And in that role, she serves as Special Projects Administrator for the Miami-Dade Police Department. Under this role, she serves as the Task Force Coordinator for the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force. And as that coordinator, Mas-Batchelor oversees over 400-member task force federally funded by the Office of Victims of Crime and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Mas-Batchelor provides training and conducts outreach in order to increase awareness and identification of human trafficking survivors here in South Florida, in the South Florida area. She also provides technical assistance nationally, including to the Department of Justice, Office for Victims of Crime as a peer reviewer informing the grant application process. Currently, Mas-Batchelor is also a task force personnel with Homeland Security Investigations Human Trafficking Group, where she provides ongoing support as it pertains to human trafficking, victim-centered best practices, and serves as a liaison between federal and local law enforcement. Caridad, or Carrie as she likes to be called, holds a master's degree from our very own Florida International University and a master's degree in law in intercultural human rights from St. Thomas University School of Law. Carrie, take it away.
Thank you. So if it's okay for me to stay here, I think it'd be best for us to engage in a conversation. We do have some great panelists with us here today, and I want to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves to you all, kind of their role within the task force and their official roles in their agencies. So I'll start with you, Lieutenant Casas.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Carrie said, my name is Gigi Casas, and I'm a lieutenant with the Miami-Dade Police Department, where I oversee the human trafficking squad, who is tasked with investigating human trafficking investigations. We are part of the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force, where we work in collaboration with HSI and all the other members of the task force. Obviously, our primary goal is to investigate human trafficking cases and prosecute the offenders that we identify, and obviously as well as helping the victims that we encounter through our investigations.
Thank you, Lieutenant Casas. Ana Vallejo.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is, well, do I need to get closer? I don't know if your Zoom folks can hear me. My name is Ana Isabel Vallejo. I am co-director at VIDA Legal Assistance, which is an organization, local organization here in Miami, Florida, that represents immigrant survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual violence mainly. I'm also an attorney. So in my role as an attorney and a member of the task force, I represent immigrant survivors who have been trafficked in both sex or labor trafficking cases throughout the process of the investigation. So if, say, I have somebody that I identify as a victim of human trafficking, I would bring that complaint to the U.S. Attorney's Office or the local police department, and then an investigation might ensue, or to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and an investigation might ensue. So I would represent the person throughout that process of the investigation and hopefully thereafter the prosecution. Also assisting them with filing T visas, advocating for continued presence, and assisting the victim in preparing a victim impact statement before the court, and also calculating the amounts of restitution that person is owed.
Thank you.
Like a very brief overview.
Very short. I know all these intros are very short. They were guided that way. We have now Special Agent Katina.
Hello, my name is Katina Hernandez. I'm Special Agent / Criminal Investigator with Homeland Security Investigations. I work in the Miami Human Trafficking Group. I'm also a member of the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force. I work with other criminal investigators in my group who are highly trained, skilled, and experienced with working with human trafficking victims and also in human trafficking prosecutions. We also work with the Miami-Dade with Lieutenant Casas detectives equally, as well as other federal agencies. I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Very excited to be here for many different reasons. Love global learning, love FIU. Sorry, I have to throw that in. My name is Florencia Dominguez. I'm the Safety and Protection Program Manager and the International Rescue Committee in Miami. I oversee the anti-trafficking program both in Miami and Tallahassee offices, the unaccompanied children and immigrant youth here in Miami. The International Rescue Committee is a social services organization, and we nonprofit also, and we have been federally funded to assist victims of trafficking since 2003. And we've been part of the task force for quite some time. 2008, I think, informally, and then formal. We'll go into a story, but very, very happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stand for this because I'd like to see everybody that's here. Because thank you for being here and taking your time. What we're going to do initially is go over a few slides where we talk a little bit about just some of the structure and function of the task force, and then we're going to dive into some conversations with some of our key partners that are here with us today. So some quick facts. So as Florencia alluded to, our task force has been around in our community since 2008. We were actually one of the first federally funded task forces by the federal government to test out, right, pilot what this enhanced collaborative model that we have today would eventually look like. We currently do receive money from the federal government. We receive money from the Office for Victims of Crime and the Bureau of Justice Assistance Program through our two primary partners, and primary only in the sense that someone needs to put their name in the application, right? But our approaches, we're all collaboratively working together, and that includes Miami-Dade Police Department and the International Rescue Committee. So the Enhanced Collaborative to receive this funding does require there to be a law enforcement partner and a victim service provider, and that's why we have Miami-Dade Police Department and the International Rescue Committee. We work in partnerships with a ton of people, which also include the United States Attorney's Office, Homeland Security Investigations, other local and state law enforcement agencies, and a ton of community organizations and NGOs that specialize specifically working with victims of human trafficking. Currently, our task force has over 400 members. That sounds like a large number. But again, if we think about how long the task force has existed in our community, it's 400 over these many, many, many years. And that membership is a very diverse representation of our community. As mentioned, it does have law enforcement, it does have victim service providers, but we also have representatives of the corporate world, we have representatives of the medical world, representatives of essentially any service or need that a survivor may need. We try to ensure that we have them representing and a member of our task force. As you see here, we do have a link to our website There's a ton more of information that's on there regarding resources, information about each of our agencies, some of the accomplishments that we've been able to do throughout the years. So I would encourage you all to check out the website when you have a chance. So I want to dive in a little bit about the expertise and experience between Miami-Dade Police Department and the International Rescue Committee, which then explains the relationships of some of our partners that are also here. So as I mentioned, Miami-Dade Police Department, per the application, is the lead law enforcement agency. However, we work very, very closely with Homeland Security Investigations, human trafficking group here based out of Miami. What we have found in this approach is that not one agency can do all the work alone. And so when we come together collaboratively through our local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, we're really able to accomplish much more. We're able to hone in on the expertise of each agency. For example, Homeland Security's expertise in working with foreign national victims and their access to those benefits attached to it. And of course, our local agency's ability to investigate locally with the resources and connections within our community. Miami-Dade Police Department started a task force in the early 2000s, actually, which was the starting point of the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force that later established in 2008, as it was mentioned. So combating human trafficking in our community has been a priority for the department, and we continue to do that work here today. Florencia gave a great synopsis of the IRC. The International Rescue Committee has been doing this work since 2003. I believe has now provided services to over 550 to be safe.
610.
610.
Counting.
And counting, all right? That means they're providing direct services to these survivors and victims of human trafficking and ensuring that they're continuing to, along with our law enforcement agencies, keep with that victim-centered, trauma-informed approach. A bit of how we function as a task force is a question we get often, being that we have so many partners and so many moving pieces. Simply put, we have a board, a group that we call our board members, which consist of our partners, as you see here, who have voting power in the direction of which the task force will go as it pertains to our grant deliverables and objectives as a collective. This consists of Miami-Dade Police Department, the International Rescue Committee, the United States Attorney's Office, Homeland Security Investigations, and I think that's everybody. They're testing me now, they're testing me. But that is essentially our leadership into ensuring that we do what we need to do and stay in compliance with our requirements by the federal government. My role as a task force coordinator, simply put, I am a liaison between all of our partners to ensure that we're working as collaboratively as possible, maximizing our resources between law enforcement and the community to ensure that we continue to increase the identification of victims, further investigate these cases, prosecute the traffickers, and also overall ensuring that the basic needs of the victim are being met throughout this process and oftentimes after. Our task force does require a membership application that is in to ensure the safety of the members, which include law enforcement, and sometimes we do have survivor leaders that are present in our meetings, so we want to ensure their safety when engaging into these community conversations. So there's an application process, and that's something we do intentionally, again, for a safety measure. We do have working committees. Most task forces don't have this structure, but we find, again, for that enhanced collaborative model, the more people we can bring to the table, the more impact that we can have. So on your screen, you'll see we have a law enforcement only committee meeting where law enforcement is able to discuss cases and the important issues that are going on there. Our services committee, bringing all service providers in our jurisdiction, which is from Monroe County all the way to the northern part of Broward, to talk about any gaps and needs of services that may be faced by our community. We have an interfaith committee which allows us to work with the churches and the interfaith communities to ensure that additional needs that may be able to be provided by the church through drives and donations and partnership in providing them with training and awareness can be done. And we have our outreach training and education committee, which does events like this to be able to come out and provide additional awareness and training to the community, professionals, and other law enforcement agencies on what human trafficking is and what we can do to continue to combat it. And we meet quarterly. We do that to ensure we have one space to be able to share all of the updates and impacts we've had throughout the last quarter in the community, and identify through conversation what are the gaps and needs that are currently in our community. So that is a very quick synopsis of everything that we do. And if everybody's okay with it, I'm going to engage in kind of sitting down and having a conversation here with these people that are really doing the day-to-day work. So I'll start with a general question to the group, and whoever feels most eager to answer the question. So our collaboration, to us, we feel that works really well. How can you explain to those that are present and those that are joining us via Zoom why it works so well? What about this collaboration you think stands out from others in a way that allows us to be so effective?
Okay, so I'll go. So, in my opinion, working with the task force for over a year now, right? I think the biggest benefit is that you have so many entities working together. You're using everybody's resources, right? So I'm provided with resources from Homeland Security and Investigations, and vice versa. They get to use our local law enforcement connections and contacts, and having all the NGOs and the victim services available to our victims when we have a case and we encounter them is a great benefit. So I think all those things together really is what makes it such a success.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I'll go. I think Cari mentioned it briefly. Like it takes a village, really. And each case is very different, and just to have the resources combined. But to give you an example, for example, law enforcement will conduct an investigation, right? And oftentimes what we see in the movies, it will be the criminal side, but we don't get to see what happens to the victim, right? And it takes task forces like this and working collaboratively to make sure that the victim also receives appropriate services. And with that, in the case of foreign born, for example, we are talking maybe was someone that was undocumented, besides needing everything else, right? From food, shelter, medical attention, or everything that under the rainbow. The person may need legal services. So by having a task force and having the partners ready, and partners that they know what they're doing, and you're not harming the victim or the case, we can rapidly move together and make sure that the victim is receiving anything that the victim needs at the time to help not only in his or her life moving forward and surviving, but also with investigation on itself, right? Because at the end of the day also, if the victim is staying here and helping with the case, we need to make sure that the victim also is okay to do so.
Anna?
I have one thing, a couple of things to add. I think the reason why this works well is because this crime, one, is a hidden crime. Two, it involves many different other crimes that happen, and identification is really hard. Our law, when it was created, envisioned a multidisciplinary approach in which we didn't treat victims just like another piece of the puzzle to get a prosecution. We didn't want to treat victims as disposable witnesses. We wanted to really address, one, the root causes of human trafficking, and two, make sure that the victim is not then vulnerable to being trafficked again. And to be able to do that, we needed to have an approach that really addressed all of the issues that led to the trafficking to begin with, and thereafter all of the leftover issues that the victim may have, or needs that the victim may have, that need to be addressed. So I think that the reason why the collaborative works well is because we have a multidisciplinary team, everybody wearing their own hat to make sure that the victim, who's the center of the investigation and the prosecution of the case, has all of their other needs met, so that they're not at risk of being re-trafficked.
So I want to add, in my experience, I think, and I've seen it work, because we all have the same mission, but separate missions at the same time. So law enforcement obviously we have a victim-centered approach as opposed to looking to arrest someone. We're looking to pretty much rescue someone initially. After that rescue is done, we would like someone to be consequenced, meaning we would like an investigation to go forward with a prosecution, but it doesn't always happen. So the mission for all of us collaboratively, right, is to rescue the victim. First and foremost, the victim is first. Law enforcement, like I said, does work the law side, the prosecution side, but initially our main goal is to make sure that the victim is rescued. And even after a prosecution, that I've worked a successful prosecution with IRC, our state and locals, other federal agencies. After the prosecution, the victim is still there and traumatized from what they have been through. So they still need to be worked with. The trafficker may get prosecuted and sentenced, and now that person is incarcerated, but that victim is still out here traumatized, not, worrying, even though that trafficker is incarcerated, worried that the person is going to come after them or somebody else will. So that's what we still all deal with the victims.
And I think that in hearing everyone's response, it highlights exactly why this is successful. Everyone is coming from their individual lens and expertise, but connecting the pieces to the other partners. As it was mentioned, when a victim is identified or rescued and there is an immediate action plan that takes place, everyone, as mentioned by Anna, knows their lane and knows how to provide that support as needed. And so there isn't a competition of this is my case or your case, or I'm going to do this, you're going to do that. It's how can we maximize what we have within this collaborative to ensure that all needs are met without, again, putting the victim in a situation where they may feel like they're dispensable, right? It's come up multiple times in different iterations from your responses, but we really pride ourselves, and you'll hear it often coming from us, of this victim-centered, trauma-informed approach that we take in when we're working with a survivor and or victim. Can each of you kind of explain where your agency or the role your agencies take in ensuring that we're doing that when working collaboratively to combat this within our communities? Florencia, if you'd like to start.
Sure. So for us, the victim-centered approach means that the victim or survivor at the point takes the lead in the process, right? We don't dictate what the person needs or how to get there. We rather we do a service plan, we hear the victim or survivor, what the needs are, and we try to give them resources and a plan to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. But we let the person dictate their own journey into, let's call it recovery or survival. And with that, it means that sometimes people are not ready to go and talk to law enforcement yet, right? We have several cases in which law enforcement hasn't been contacted yet, and that's okay. That's, we work together, but at the same time, we all of them mention trauma. We want to make sure that the victim is not re-traumatized. We try to minimize that. So we go at their pace. We meet the person where they are, and we help them every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So just to jump off of what she said, exactly. So the victims or survivors are not always ready to speak with law enforcement. So our victim-centered approach for law enforcement, we're trained in an academy to protect and serve. So most of the times, though, we're not going to be in wherever we are, front line, investigating behind a desk and encounter a victim saying, hey, help me. That's very rare. Mainly what we do encounter is escalation and de-escalation, either going out to arrest or being called out because there's a crime happening. If there's a victim on scene, it's very, very, very rare that they are going to tell any of us, our law enforcement, all law enforcement partners, that they're a victim. So thank God for our NGOs who do speak to them, and they are less afraid of them because they have been either brainwashed or traumatized into being afraid of law enforcement. And for Homeland Security, we have one more thing. If they are undocumented, they're afraid of being deported. Same thing with state and locals. If they have an arrest warrant or if they've gotten arrested, they're also afraid of getting arrested or getting picked up on that warrant. If you are a victim or if we identify someone as a victim survivor, there is no deportation. There is no arrest for their warrant. That will be dealt with on a whole other level. First and foremost, we look for and identify victims and survivors. If they want to come forward and work a case with us, that's up to them. But again, first and foremost, their safety and their, peace is our main mission.
Thank you, Katina. Ana?
So for the attorneys, the role is to really educate the survivor or the trafficked person about what their rights are, about what it entails to file a complaint, what it entails to file a complaint with law enforcement in the federal level versus law enforcement at the state level, what it entails to collaborate in an investigation. How long the process it's going to take. If they're out of status, then what are your immigration benefits and which one might be the best one for that person? So it really takes on the role of making sure, like Florencia said, that the person is educated so that then they can guide us as to what they want to do with the rest of their lives. This is a crime where the person's will has been taken away, and so we're returning that that sense of this is my life and this is the decision that I'm going to make. It's going to be about me. So the process of education takes many different aspects, because at the initial phase, you might have somebody who's afraid and who doesn't want to file a complaint, but then they think about it and they think, yes, I want to file a complaint. They move forward with filing the complaint and participating in the investigation. Now we're going to be heading into trial. Oh my God, what does that mean? Do I have to see the trafficker again? Mm-hmm. Will they be there in front of me? So my role is not only to educate the victim, but also reassess and sit down with that person and explain to them what's going on, and then serve as a representative or a liaison with law enforcement to make sure that that person, again, is the one, that person and their needs is what's guiding the process. So sometimes prosecutors will consult with the victim, or actually they have a duty to consult with the victim prior to reaching a plea agreement, for example. So we would be the intermediary and explain to the victim and let that person decide whether they want the case to move forward or if they're okay with the plea agreement.
So empowering their choices.
Right.
Lieutenant Casas?
Well, I think everybody's kind of covered it, right? The main point is really to help the victim. On law enforcement side, obviously, we also want to be able to apprehend the trafficker and try to get information from the victim so that we can build a case against this offender. But of course, like everybody's mentioned, their well-being and their mental well-being is number one. So if they're not comfortable right away in giving us the information we need, then we kind of take a step back and approach them again and again until they're ready to come forward and give us the information that we may need on that investigation so that we have enough to prosecute the trafficker. But like everyone said, their well-being is number one, and that's really the main approach that we take in this model and in the task force.
Thank you, Lieutenant. And as a recap, right, each one's lane or responsibility, from prosecution to investigations to victim services, all tie into one thing. If the survivor and or victim is in a space where they feel like their needs are being met, that their team, which is essentially what this is working collaboratively, is on the same page, and is, for lack of a better word, speaking the same language as to what the priority is, which is keeping them in the center of all of these moving pieces and their priorities and needs in that center focus for everyone, then we have seen the success of that being successful prosecutions, their trust in the partners to show up for that prosecution where they may have to face their traffickers, knowing that they have their team behind them, supporting them as they go through these oftentimes difficult phases of prosecution and the conversations with law enforcement, even the conversations with victim service providers, and assessing what are their needs when perhaps it's been years that they haven't been able to express what their needs were, and now they have someone that's on their side doing that. So going off of that, and we'll let this be the last question and open it for questions to the Zoom and to everyone here. Could each of you, or whoever feels like they have a story that comes to their mind, of a moment that you consider successful of this collaboration? Florencia, you're nodding like something came to you, so I'll let you go first.
Anna, we have many
Yes.
cases, right? And I think we have each other's cell phone, but we call at 3 in the morning or 4, like, and everyone is 100% committed to the cause. That I can tell you for sure. They're very passionate about this work. But one case, it could be, Anna, I was reflecting into the labor case. I don't know if you want to give some.
So, yeah, I think that case was successful on many aspects. In 2016, we had a group of, I'd want to say maybe 12 victims of human trafficking that were being forced to work in one of the tomato processing plants here in Homestead. They had been trafficked all throughout Florida and North Carolina, South Carolina. And the case came about through collaboration with another organization that works with farm workers, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and the Fair Food Standards Council. We got referral for one survivor, and we started working with that person. I called my counterpart at the federal government, started the representation. It was initially an anonymous complaint that was filed. There were then 2 victims. By the time we were interviewing, it was 2 victims and then 3. And then there was a raid, and others were identified and provided assistance. I think that there were a myriad of issues related to the immigration status of the workers, related to the abuse that they had suffered, related to some of the violence that they had experienced. And it was really working through a collaborative approach. And yes, 3 o'clock in the morning and, so forth, that we were able to not only get that case identified, but then have the survivors come back and testify and provide victim impact statements at the trial. The case was successfully, it was pled out, and as a result, one of the traffickers, I think, was sentenced to 4 years. It was a very quick prosecution, very quick investigation. I think in less than a year, we had everything wrapped up, and that's a success story.
Mm-hmm. Katina?
I will never ever forget the first prosecution I had right out of the academy, actually. And the reason why it's very special to me is because IRC had just started helping domestic victims. Before, when we would have a domestic case, because it's very prevalent, Miami is still number 2. So we have human trafficking right here where we live, where we raise our kids, where we wake up every day. So it was really difficult to get the type of services that IRC has. There are other service providers. We have many members. However, the partnership and the relationship we have with IRC is very special because of the 2 o'clock in the morning phone calls. We have this bond where, we know, okay, they need this, they need an Uber, they need food, they need a gift card. Well, that one case, it was a 1 victim and a 1 trafficker. And she was being forced to prostitute by him. He was allegedly, he came in as her boyfriend and then started pimping her out and beating her violently, having her raped. She ran away. He kidnapped her, went after her, and even she ran to the hospital. He came after her in the hospital. Anyway, it took about 4 months for the investigation. And during that 4 months, we kept losing the victim because she kept getting scared But holding her together was the help of IRC and other state and locals who IRC would provide gift cards if she needed to eat, Walmart cards for groceries, whatever the case may be. So the trial was 4 days. The jury deliberated. Somebody's muted. Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
After 4 months, we gathered enough evidence to have a trial because the trafficker completely denied that, refused to plea. And we went to trial. It was a 4-day trial, and it took the jury to deliberate in 4 hours to find him guilty, and he got sentenced to life in prison. So without the help of, it was a team. It was a huge team effort. And that this woman's life, you know, she always says, you know, you saved my life, you changed my life. No, you changed your life. You saved your life because you came to us and you allowed us to help you. So that always brings me so much joy to know that we can do that together.
Any other stories? So for me, when I think of the success of this collaboration, or success at all when talking about the investigation or providing services or support to a survivor of human trafficking, I think one thing we can all agree on, while these stories are amazing, they don't often turn out that way, right? So there's a lot of small successes that we see throughout the time that we all have the privilege of working alongside a survivor and a victim who, again, as you mentioned, Katina, at the end of your story, trust in our collaborative and our approach to ensure that we can provide whatever we can at the moment for their needs. And so success, you know, Florencia, we've seen this, and Ana, right? Getting that job may be a success, or going back and trying to get back into school, or getting a driver's license for the first time. From the investigative standpoint, the fact that they showed up to your office one more time to engage in the conversation, knowing that sometimes there is fear and just different feelings associated with working with collaboratives like this. Those are successes that we get to see every day. And they're truly successes to us because we understand how pivotal that is. By showing up to the office to talk to the detective or the agents, they're getting one step closer, right, to getting the information. Showing up to work with Ana and, you know, Florencia at the IRC, again, one step closer to perhaps identifying a need that they may have not shared the first time around. And so, because we have that approach, our end goal is not only to get a successful prosecution, or only get, you know, arrest the trafficker. There's a lot that takes place in between, and when we know that there's multiple victims involved in a situation, even being able to identify more as we go along is considered a success for us. So, any comments?
Yeah, I wanted to say that success for us, we represent survivors. I mentioned from the beginning until the end of their immigration cases are finished, and that means later on applying for once they have the T visa, applying for their legal permanent residency, reuniting families that may have been left in the home country, and then thereafter applying for their citizenship. So for us, we're privileged to really see what success means when we have the full collaboration of the task force and that individual being able to access all of the services that are at their disposal. We have business owners, we have nurses, we have law school graduates. You know, we have people being able to do what they came here to do, what their dreams were, being able to provide something better for their families. And that is the measure of success.
And for, I think, all of us to keep it all, also like to keep the conversation honest, right? We do get to try to celebrate those little successes, because even though this is extremely successful, it's not enough. Right, and the services are not enough. And we mentioned every case is different. There's a difference on, you know, there's issues that are systemic. There are issues like, and we don't have enough, right? So we try to celebrate and mimic those best practices and those little successes, because we already we know that it's never enough, and sometimes this can be a little bit of an isolating job, or it's tough also for the victim survivors, of course, number one, but for those doing the job day in and day out is sometimes tough.
And that's why a collaborative approach like this is successful, because we can lean on each other in those moments where, the investigator is saying, I haven't been able to reach the survivor in a long time, but maybe the service provider has, and they can try to help build rapport and reconnect them with law enforcement when they're ready. Or vice versa, a victim comes to the service provider or comes to Anna's office and seek for, immigration support and finds out, hey, they're actually a victim of other crimes, and there's connections with law enforcement, both local, state, and federal, to be able to say, let me connect you with those people, because that's a burden. Each of us have our own lane, and we don't know how to. Those of us that are not investigators don't know how to investigate, and those that provide services, vice versa. So we really embody and rely on each other for it to be successful, because not one agency or one side of this of the investigation or prosecution or victim services can do it alone. It really needs to be done collectively, or we have found that it needs to be, we find success in being collective in our approach. So I thank you guys for all of your in-depth answers to the questions and engaging. I do want to open the floor up to questions both through the Zoom and in person. That way we can give the students or whoever else is participating an opportunity to ask whatever they may from any of us. Any questions?
So I have 3.
Yes.
Maybe I'll just read them all out, and then you guys can pick the ones that you like the best. But so the first one I had is, do you foresee an end to human trafficking, or do you think it'll always be an issue? And the next one is, should there be an amnesty granted to human trafficking victims who are undocumented or they have warrants out for their arrest? And how would you prevent traffickers from trafficking again after their incarceration if they didn't have a life sentence?
Okay, so let's start with one.
That's a good question.
Will trafficking ever end, essentially, is the question, right? So who wants to tackle that one?
The other one seemed more complicated for me to answer. I'm going to go ahead with this one. But if we think about it, right, what human trafficking is an economic crime. It's about exploiting someone for the benefit of money or something of value. So if you think of that dynamic in human nature and the history of humans, I don't think, unfortunately, ever is going to end, because there's always predators looking to exploit someone. So, in making, especially when it comes to economic gains, people tend to be ruthless and ever greedy and all of that. So, unfortunately, I don't think it will end, but we are definitely making it tougher here.
Yeah, that's a real tough one, and I agree with Florencia. I'm not sure that it will ever completely end, but I think it's important to mention that educating the community and everyone educating themselves about indicators and signs and things to recognize when they're out and about or in your neighborhood or your community that you can report to law enforcement. I think that's a huge step in the right direction to help with the issue. And also educating people to not become victims, right? So I think that would be a great step, like I said, in the right direction. Will it ever end? I mean, that's a tough one, but.
Well, we have to think about the demand associated with this type of victimization. And as long as, unfortunately, there is a demand for this type of exploitation, it will be a constant battle for groups like ourselves to try to really, as we say, you hear it often, combating human trafficking. Ending it is, you saw our whole demeanors were end it, we wish, but it's something.
I would like to exhort you to go into some of the websites and work that has been provided, not website, apps that have been provided so that you can measure your slavery impact. Florencia mentioned this is an economic crime. You've mentioned that this is a demand issue. The reality is when we have demand for cheap labor, when we have poverty, when we have economic crisis, when we have vulnerabilities that are not being addressed by society, this crime gets to flourish. And if it, and it flourishes both in the labor sector and in the sex trafficking sector. So I always think of this crime as a labor crime, and where sex trafficking is a form of labor or forced labor. We really need to think about, where do our tomatoes come from? How were they harvested? Who harvested them? What were the labor conditions of the farmers that were working in those farms? Same thing for the services that we're provided in a restaurant. Who's cleaning our dishes? How are they working? What are those labor conditions? And if we are able to address those things, then maybe we can end human trafficking. But if we're not conscientious about what role as consumers we have in human trafficking, I don't see how we're going to end it. Because we also want cheap services and we want cheap goods to purchase.
So,
Immokalee, how do you say it?
Immokalee.
Immokalee, yes. So it was a documentary called Food Chains, and it talked about the abuse that they endure, and if they were like paid a penny more or something, it would make such a big difference. And yeah, so that I just thought that tied in, because I just watched that for my one class. So yeah.
I also want to add, remember what human trafficking is. It's modern day slavery.
Right.
Slavery has always been around since history. So it just evolves into different, they're not being taken from their country and put on a boat and put on a platform.
That's exactly what the documentary was saying.
But they're still there. And then working smuggling crimes, I've also seen people, and it's not the people that are committing crimes, it's the coyotes and the smugglers who are taking advantage of these people who just want a better life and come to the U.S. So within that, you have all types of trafficking, labor, debt bondage, and is that ever going to end? Is there ever going to be third world countries that are able to live like people do in the U.S.? It was my dream and my hope for it to end, and I have dedicated my life to it. I do see myself working and fighting against human trafficking for as long as I can. But that is all of our hopes and prayers, is that it does end. And again, the awareness, we weren't having these conversations when I first started investigating crimes of human trafficking. I had coworkers in law enforcement for 20 years who did not know what human trafficking was. So we are evolving with slowing it down, stopping it, the awareness, and hopefully it could end.
So, yeah. Oh, okay. No problem. Yeah, we'll come back to it. No.
Yeah, she did have.
No, but
the other two
yeah.
had really good questions.
The other two questions that she had. Yeah, absolutely. Do the other.
No,
So there was, go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, amnesty for foreign national victims.
So right now, there's a T visa available for victims of human trafficking who are foreign-born and have filed a complaint and collaborated in the investigation or prosecution of the case. That would let that person stay in the United States for a period of 4 years, and then thereafter they can apply for the legal permanent resident status. They can also petition for their family members. So in that sense, the law is broad, like refugee type status. You can petition for your spouse and your children. You can petition if you show clear and present danger. You can also petition for your parents and your siblings. So the law does provide some protection for survivors, and then after they have legal permanent resident status for 5 years, they can apply for citizenship. So it's not an amnesty, it's a special status for victims because of their condition as victims. There's also a U visa available. Sometimes people are not able to access the T visa, so the U visa could be another avenue, and that's also available for victims of other violent crimes like domestic violence, sexual violence, incest, and human trafficking is also included in that very list of crimes. So it's not an amnesty, but it's a protection available.
And I don't remember the third question.
And the third question was,
Oh.
Preventing, I do work with probation officers, so it's very interesting to hear that side once they do get out. And that is what they do. They monitor their behavior, their actions, what they do on a day-to-day basis, and they are constantly putting them back into incarceration. So that is the only part of prevention. Other than that, hoping that they have some type of
Rehabilitation.
they see some type of light once they're incarcerated. Other than that, that's the prevention that we have right
We're
now.
hoping that they're incarcerated long enough that they can't do it anymore.
Exactly, because it's a 15 to life, so it depends on their age too. When they get.
Would the probation be life as well, or does that also depend?
That depends. That completely depends on how their behavior was in prison.
Thank you.
Hey, great. So we've got a couple of questions from our 29 online participants.
Yay.
Let's start with this one because I think it's a great action item question. What recommendations would you have for a student or a professional to get involved in some sort of supportive or fundraising role?
I can start. Well, I would say volunteer, intern. Shout out to our volunteers and interns here. That's, for sure, of course, we protect confidentiality and the safety of victims. But to be quite honest, although we have funding and we receive a lot of, we can receive maybe some foundation funds or federal funds or state funds, whatever funds it might be. There's always, of course, systems of accountability, but some restrictions as well. And sometimes the needs are so grave. So for professionals out there that want to donate or business owners or students, anyone with resources, sometimes we need those unrestricted funds or unrestricted resources that we can tap into right away. Sometimes we need a plane ticket like now, and we are able to provide that, but other agencies may not. So I think funding is always needed. Services, of course, but we want services, of course, that are victim-centered, human rights-based, and knowledgeable. But the task force will train.
One thing that I think is really the critical, funding for working on human trafficking cases is very limited, even though it sounds like a lot of money,
Right.
It's really not. I think initially you can provide services for 3 months under one grant and then another 3 more months or 4 more months under another grant. That's 7 months. That it's definitely not enough. When we're talking about legal representation of an immigrant survivor, when processes take 2 years for immigration to adjudicate an application, you really see we provide continued services to victims of human trafficking that are definitely not covered by the grant. And especially when we're providing maybe 10 years of services to somebody.
That's what I was going to ask. We have cases, that we refer to Anna or vice versa. IRC is gone, right, the social service side, but Anna is still working on the case. And the same with other partners, and the same vice
Right.
versa when we can. So definitely more resources are needed.
Same thing for victim compensation. You have victim compensation for 3 years. You may have an injury that is a latent injury or something that happens as a result, comes up 10 years later. How is that victim going to pay for medical services then? And that is also an issue because victim compensation is available only for a 3-year period. So those are things that I think we need to better look into or tap into the rest of the society to figure out how are we going to help in the long term, because there's immediate short-term needs, but then there's the longer-term needs that the victim's going to have that we may need to be creative in tapping into how we're going to fund those.
Yeah. And I think the one-stop shop to that, and this is being the task force coordinator role, is, like I said, people can join. It is, you do have to go through an application process, but as Florencia alluded to, there's an educational piece that comes with it. You need to educate yourself first on understanding what human trafficking is, and then finding a way that whatever resource or tools or skills you have can be, maximized within this collaborative. So my contact information, I'm sure will show up, or I'm happy to share it as well to provide any additional resources there.
And also, and for law enforcement, so as a federal law enforcement officer, state and local, when you, we do have interns and volunteers, and we have explorers, but it's not promised that you're going to get into a human trafficking group. You can work other groups and then eventually, show your interest in working in these groups and then work these investigations. However, what I would like to say as far as like what I experience with investigations is our shortage of housing, our shortage of translators, our shortage of just people. So because there's so many. So if you want to participate in fundraising, and then like Carrie said, I always say, join our task force, and there is that educational piece. But that is what we're seeing the biggest struggle with as far as law enforcement side, the communication and the gaps in communication and housing. Housing is huge.
So the thing is, if you let us, we'll go for hours talking about
Yeah, exactly.
So I always have to be the person to reel us back in, and I'll do that because I see we have one more minute, and I want to be mindful of the questions and time. So go ahead with your next question.
So I'm going to prioritize here, but I think this one's absolutely fantastic. First of all, this participant wants to thank you very sincerely for this very important work that you do. And then just on a more personal level, I guess, how do you create a distance between yourself and the cases that you work so that you can continue to find that motivation? I know that earlier you talked about leaning on each other and being able to really leverage the strengths of each one of the organizations that you work for through the collaborative, but on a more personal level, how do you ground yourself?
So I think we all believe in full transparency in the work that we do. Vicarious trauma is real. Vicarious trauma, when you work with these types of vulnerable populations, with high victimization, with these very intense cases, there's always the chance that their experience and you working with them day to day can affect you. And I think, as you've heard of the 3 o'clock in the morning calls and the early mornings, late nights, and the constant effort put into trying to do the best that collectively can be done to investigate these cases, I think that one of the things that as a task force coordinator that I get to work alongside all these agencies that I see is common, and they each can say what they feel, is that each agency prioritizes and understands the severity of the cases that are being worked and investigated, and prioritize providing their staff, their agents, their caseworkers, their attorneys, the time to take a step back if they need to, seek support not only from partners but internally within their agency. The topic is a heavy one, and one that none of us take for granted, that does and can have an effect on the day-to-day work that we do, but really trying to instill systems to ensure that there's support. Each agency has their own respective, support services and numbers and resources to be able to, tap into when needed, if needed, to ensure that everyone is at their best to continue to provide the best quality of work that can be provided. Did I sum it up? Or?
Yes,
I think,
very well said.
yeah, I think also, personally, like having hobbies, taking vacation.
Yes.
As an agency, now I'm putting on my administrator hat. I also look at, make sure that my staff who's working on a case takes off when they need to take off. Have mindfulness sessions with the entire team. We're a small agency, right? But sometimes you kind of build in to your program and to your employee manuals that kind of flexibility, so that if you have somebody who's been working particularly hard on one case or on multiple cases, that the what they're taking in, they're also able to kind of separate a little bit and reset. So we do encourage our staff to take vacation. Sometimes we try to also make sure that we're very flexible with the their hours, so that they don't feel that pressure. And we have hobbies. I have hobbies. Like I play beach volleyball, I dance.
I wanted to add, because we are talking about our perspective, right? And sometimes the work is so much, and we try to take that time off, but then we think of how much is going to pile up when we go back. But we got to keep reminding ourselves to, self-care too. But one thing when they were talking about distance, we also have to maintain
Boundaries.
as a best practice a way of dealing with victims and survivors, because at the end of the day, we are not going to be there forever, right? So especially when you're new in this job and, you get attached, you can get attached, and you want to know and you want to be with someone from, the rest of their days. But the reality is, we won't be there. So it will be very unfair to victims and survivors for us to come and say, here, all arms, count with me for whatever, because that's not the reality, unfortunately.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So we keep in mind also that dynamic.
All right.
Yes, and I'm with Anna and everybody else. Work-life balance. Learn how to. It takes a while, but you have to learn how to let it go, because you have. Some of us have families, and if not, we have ourselves, and we have to learn how to find hobbies, travel, yoga, exercise, meditate. It's very important, because if we can't be there for ourselves, we can't be there for them. So.
And on that note, I know you want to join with me in thanking our panelists for coming and sharing their expertise and insights today. So thank you all so much for being here. And I know we could continue the conversation, and hopefully we will. Maybe it's going to be online or in our classes, and we may just have to have you guys back. That's all I can say. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.